I'm struck by Dr. Guthrie's words of being made whole. The idea that we can be made whole with whole plant foods, unprocessed plant foods, is just really remarkable. And this film is a short one and it packs a big punch. So I'm very excited now to bring up to speak with all of us Dr. George Guthrie and Corrine Bejarano. Welcome. Great to have you join us.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your stories. Corrine, you specifically, and Dr. Guthrie for being a leader in the field. I'll just share a little bit more about each of your bios with our viewers, and then we'll launch into some questions. But Dr. Guthrie, you have not only been involved in family medicine and counseling patients with lifestyle medicine, but you have also become an advocate for lifestyle medicine earlier in your career when you were serving on the island of Guam, where you saw a high incidence of type 2 diabetes in the population. And that was really a spark for you. We'll dig into that a little bit more perhaps in a moment, but you've also led the development of several lifestyle change programs, including the Complete Health Improvement Project, CHIP, and the Wellspring Diabetes Program, and Advent Health's own Creation Life program. In the film, I know it talked about your book, Eat Plants, Feel Whole. And that's right on. Harness the healing power of plants and transform your health. And also the Eat Plants, Feel Whole journal, both published by Advent Health Press. Wonderful contributions to the field. We're so grateful to have you. And Corrine, it was mentioned in the film, you were a registered nurse, and you've obviously overcame so much in your own personal experience. And I love what your words that were shared with me prior. When you really decide you're going to change your lifestyle and you stand firm with that decision, it radically changes your life for the better, and you'll never want to go back. Truly inspirational. Thank you. I think what I'd love to do is to start with you, Dr. Guthrie, and just make a note for anybody who's been watching the film and doesn't know that the Adventist community has been a major leader in the field of plant-based nutrition. In part because part of the religious principles are to make the body whole through healthy eating. I would love to hear a little bit more from you about how this has influenced your own practice, both, I guess, when you were in Guam and learning about plant-based, about chronic disease and its incidence there, and how being grounded in the Adventist community ultimately brought you to this way of thinking and acting.
Yes, it's been a joy through the years, certainly since I discovered for the first time that a patient could actually reverse their disease by making lifestyle change. The first patient I had was on the island of Guam, an Italian businessman who came to me with a skin problem. And as we looked at it, I said, that looks like a cholesterol deposit under the skin. And as I said, well, we need to look this up and see what happens. So we did some lab tests. His cholesterol was high and his blood sugar was high. His chart told me his blood pressure was high, and I knew he was overweight. At that time, we did not know that these diseases were kind of connected together. Gerald Reaven from Stanford University was the one who did that, I guess, seminal lecture and got the award from the American Diabetes Association for his kind of comprehension of this, introducing to us this business of 4 diseases: diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, obesity, all tied together by high insulin levels. And he introduced the term as Syndrome X. A cardiologist said, you can't have that. We already have it for something else. So I think the term we use now is metabolic syndrome, as the film kind of introduced. So when I saw this fella and he refused to take insulin, I was beginning to understand about insulin resistance and how it might be reversed from some of Gerald Reaven's, I'm sorry, wrong name there. A gentleman from University of California, San Diego. And so I gave him the exercise to, eat some plants, begin to exercise. And I won't say anything about pills, and I won't say anything about insulin, because that really threw him off. And he did it. I love stubbornness when it's headed in the right direction. And over that year, he lost 60 pounds. His cholesterol normalized. His blood pressure normalized. his blood sugars normalized, and all without medication. I had never seen it before. It's amazing how dramatic, how healing, how much healing there is in the body when we start to treat it right. It was mentioned in the film that when the physiology, when we treat it right, it's a healing machine. We tend to get better, and that really sparked my interest in helping people make the change. Now, you asked the question about kind of religious or spiritual kind of perspective on this. And my perspective is that the laws that God has given us, whether they're moral or physical, are true. And I like to say, you can't break the laws of health and you can't break the moral law. You only prove it correct. If you tell lies, nobody's going to trust you. Your life will begin to disintegrate. That's a moral law. If you eat junk food, your life's going to turn into junk. Well, that's a physical law or a physiologic law. So these are kind of cause and effect relationships. So my perspective has been to treat them that way rather than demands for people. It's like you don't have to keep the laws of health. You get to take the law. You get to keep the laws of health. If you don't, you're living with disease, and who wants to do that?
Yeah, what a beautiful way of talking about it. Thank you. And I would love to also just dig in with you briefly. There seem to be many testimonials from patients recovering from diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, elevated cholesterol. Are you seeing this type of recovery in patients with other kinds of conditions, inflammatory conditions like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, bowel diseases? Does it go beyond just the metabolic syndrome, the metabolic diseases?
It goes far beyond the metabolic diseases. One of the fun things that happens, and you heard mention of some of these things, joint pains tend to go away. The acid reflux tends to improve. People sleep better. Their emotions are better. Depression will also tend to move away. You bring up the autoimmune diseases. Yes, there are multiple stories of that. It's harder for me to explain that. I understand what happens when with the diabetes, heart disease, because the physiology is fairly well understood. In the autoimmune diseases, it's not quite as clear. Corrine has type 1 diabetes, as she shared with us, and she had kind of metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes on top of that. And we were able to reverse, or she was able to reverse by her choices, the metabolic syndrome part of things, but the autoimmune, the type 1 diabetes, has not gone away. It's just been a whole lot easier to control. So some of these other things, yes, there are reports, for example, of multiple sclerosis getting better with a plant-based diet, rheumatoid arthritis, and other things. But we don't have all the answers for all the autoimmune diseases.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Corrine, let's go to you now. I would love for you to start to address some of the questions that have come up about how can we get started with a whole food plant-based lifestyle. And to begin, I wonder if you could tell us how you were actually introduced to the lifestyle. It sounds like you had some very clear-sighted medical professionals who helped you to find some of this information out. But then how did you get it? How did you get it going?
Yeah, so believe it or not, I actually started thinking, oh, maybe I should go plant-based by watching a film that was very similar in nature to PlantWise because it chronicled an individual's life and just their chronic diseases and what they were suffering with, and how when they got rid of the processed kind of standard American diet foods and then introduced plants into their life, like they just had this radical health improvement. And it just blew my mind because I was in a point where I wasn't doing so great. I had met with my endocrinologist and I had, I think, diabetes, I don't know, maybe for about 8 years. But like Dr. Guthrie said, I was like in this metabolic syndrome state. And he pretty much was very, very frank with me, looking at my labs and saying, like, what are you doing? And I just kind of looked at him and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not doing anything. And that was really the truth. I wasn't doing anything to really benefit myself, to, improve my health in any way, my diet, my exercise, managing stress, sleep, things like that. So seeing this film, just like a light bulb went off, and I thought, wow, well, maybe I could do that. Like, that is something that's like in the future, the person I want to be, like healthy and engaged and just with this vibrancy. And so it led down this path of, hey, I want to start this. Can you support me?
That's phenomenal. And so then what were some of the initial steps that you took? How did you begin putting it into practice?
I went cold turkey, believe it or not. I just was so motivated and inspired that I just got rid of everything in my life that was not plant-based and just started from scratch. And I think like the biggest thing that you can do is just like, don't make it too complicated for yourself. You look at what you don't want to eat and you look at what you do want to eat. And that's the things you begin to incorporate that in whichever way you can, whether you're eating a green smoothie, or you're juicing, or, you're having this amazing large salad and potatoes, and, really what is not on, the limit for you. I mean, the sky's the limit when it comes to plants. So just kind of, for me, it was just cutting everything off. I mean, the same time that I radically changed my diet and went cold turkey, I also was giving up, my beverages of choice, which were coffee and pop. And so I was drinking more water because that part of the beverage side of the diet didn't really incorporate into the food either. And so it was just an amazing time period of a lot of detoxing, because that's what happens when you're eating these very powerful foods. Plants, they just are power packed. And when you eat them, your body's like, oh, thank you. This is what I've been waiting for all along. Like, thank you for giving me the tools to do what I was meant to do.
That's such a beautiful way of talking about it. Tell me, we had some direct questions from our audience members. Your suggestions for best cookbooks, maybe best blogs, things that you found to help you in taking on some new recipes.
Oh, well, I mean, not to just put a plug in for Dr. Guthrie's book, but he has some amazing recipes on his new book. In fact, one of my favorite soup recipes is the cheddar broccoli soup. And it's really, really a wonderful soup. My whole family enjoys it. There's just so much out there. You go to Amazon. I don't know that I have a favorite cookbook. I use lots, and I, try to do things on my own too. And we eat pretty simply at our home.
That's great. And I know you have little ones or a little one, and I'd love to hear how the changes that you made to your own personal health ultimately affected your family. Are they eating the way you eat? How does that work?
Yeah, so at the time, my kids were pretty young. They're teenagers now, believe it or not. But, they were used to pizza, macaroni, and cheese. They were vegetarian. That's how I grew up. And I didn't learn how to cook meat because my mother never cooked it for me. So if I was ever going to eat some meat, it would always be out at a restaurant, maybe for a work engagement or something. I was vegetarian in front of my children. And so they were raised that way as well. So when my husband was on board, definitely his mother passed away in her very early 40s of ovarian cancer. And so he was very motivated as well to get on this health path. And so he adopted early on with me eating plant-based. And then the kids, we kind of eased into it a little bit, and to the point, they eat just like us now. And they're excited too. I mean, they're seeing the benefits, and they're loving it as well.
That's great. And I share that story as well with my family and my kids living this lifestyle. It's great to hear that it has worked so nicely for all of you.
Yeah.
Dr. Guthrie, let's bring it back to you now, just to go in a little bit more onto some of the questions that our viewers are asking about specific conditions. Let's say conditions associated with aging, specifically osteoporosis and menopause symptoms. How are these conditions affected by how we eat, and what might be particularly helpful from the plant kingdom as we age?
Yeah, that's a very kind of interesting question, osteoporosis and menopause. If we, I remember years ago, I was working on my master's degree in public health nutrition, so I was doing a lot of reading. And I remember reading some articles. Dr. Haney, I think it was kind of Dr. Calcium at the time, and he shared in his kind of review of calcium and osteoporosis and whatnot, that when a postmenopausal woman is, in that state, they tend to lose bone once the estrogen drops away. And so they needed 12 to 1,500 milligrams of calcium a day to reach calcium balance. And then he noted that the evidence shows that if one gets away from animal products, the high, especially high animal protein, and eats only plants, that you only need about 400 to 450 milligrams of calcium in order to get calcium balance. That is, it's not how much calcium you eat, it's how much calcium you keep. And then, the literature kind of shares this kind of information in a bunch of different studies. The mechanism is amino acids are slightly acid. Our body doesn't like to go acid, so the buffer that's used to buffer the body and get it back right to that 7.4 pH where we need it is calcium carbonate, and it tends to come the fastest kind of buffer comes right out of the bone itself. And of course, with the extra acid, amino acids, goes out in the urine, creates a urine that's slightly acid and pulls calcium out. So I think we understand the mechanism of that fairly well. So it makes sense to eat a plant-based diet, to exercise. And no, you don't have to have dairy in order to actually make your bones stronger. The evidence for that is not nearly as strong as the marketers would have us believe. Several years ago, I ran across a study looking at children. So children who were still in school, and they took a rather large school, looked at their diet, and then looked at their fracture rates to see if what it was in the diet that was actually protecting the kids from breaking their bones. Now, of course, they don't have the brittle bones of the older folks, but I guess they do fall more than some of the rest of us. And of course, they break bones. So it was very interesting to find that the strongest predictor of avoiding fractures was actually the amount of fruit and vegetables. And there was no statistical benefit when they looked at the data from taking the dairy. So, that was a very interesting, in my mind, insight into that kind of calcium and pH challenge that our body has. We tend to do better with the plants. They've got a lot of antioxidants. Calcium is the most plentiful substance on the face of the earth, the calcium carbonate. Where do you think the cow gets the calcium to put in its milk? Well, it comes from the grass or hay that's being eaten. Right? There's just an awful lot of calcium out there. So, avoiding the high protein so we can keep more of our calcium makes a lot of sense. Did I cover that well enough? Or
yeah, actually, really comprehensively. Can you speak then also to menopause?
Menopause. What a challenge we have with that. Everything is going along fine, and then the estrogen kind of drops off. In cultures who focus more on plants, and I'm thinking of especially in the Orient, we find that the phytoestrogens tend to blunt the hot flashes and those types of things that come from menopause as the estrogen drops, and it can be going up as well. It seems to be a rapid change in estrogen levels that tend to cause the vascular instability that makes the kind of those hot flashes hit. So the phytoestrogens attach to the receptors for estrogen, and when they do that, they have only a mild effect. So if you have a lot of kind of estrogen changes, whether it's up or down, and the phytoestrogen from the plants is attached to the estrogen receptor, you have a much more stable environment. And many of the Oriental women who eat this way tell us they just don't have the same symptoms that the women who are taking the standard American diet do. So yes, are you going to be able to stave off the osteoporosis? Well, the plants can help from that standpoint. The hot flashes can be modulated very nicely with the kind of natural phytoestrogens. So those are beneficial.
Wonderful. And I know Dr. Neil Barnard, who was featured in the film recently, did a study on the use of soy in women with menopause, soy being a main source of phytoestrogens. So I think you've explained the mechanism really nicely there. Excellent. And so let's go back to you, Corrine, for a moment. What were some of the challenges that you faced? Obviously, you said you did it all at once. You made the change all at once. Was there anything that was a challenge for you on a personal level, whether it was, access to the things that you wanted to find, or mindset aspects of the psyche? What did you have to overcome as you went through the transition?
I think one of the biggest challenges is just finding how to structure your life. And try to find the time and the place for cooking and just preparing and making sure you have kind of all your ducks in a row, because the greatest challenge I have found is if I'm not prepared, I will fail. And so that's what I really tried to do. I learned that very early on in the beginning is, I needed to have a plan, and I need to make sure I had all those elements within the plan to be able to execute it. So that way, when I got to that point, I knew I had everything I needed to make sure that I could be successful. And sometimes I think I complicated it for myself. You just come from this point of perspective of, these recipes that you're used to cooking and ingredients maybe you're more used to working with, and then trying to figure out how it has to be the exact same as a plant-based diet, when it really doesn't. It really could have been just much simpler, the way I approached it. But, you're also having to incorporate your family. So you're having to take like and dislikes in from, younger kids who may not like a slimy texture of a squash or something like that, and trying to say, okay, well, what vegetables do you like? What kind of flavors and tastes do you think would be good with this? And really trying to bring the whole family together instead of just trying to be the only person that is kind of like tackling everything.
Absolutely. And can you give our viewers some examples of some of the meals that you love to make, maybe on a go-to basis, the things that you find to be the most useful for you or your family?
Yeah, so one meal like we eat almost every week is just brown rice with lentils, and we top it full of lettuces and tomatoes and cucumbers, and then squeeze some lemon juice on it. And that is a family favorite. And that is such an easy meal that you can have already prepped and ready even the night before. So that way, as the day's starting, you're getting lunches together and things like that. It's just such a simple meal. We eat that almost every week, and it's just a family favorite that we love.
Fantastic. And do you have any tips for how to manage this way of eating when you're traveling and navigating a new food environment?
Yeah, the best advice I can give you is just prepare. And so prepare by like scouting out the area you're going to be at, looking at, maybe grocery stores that are there. If there's a health food store that maybe you could find something with, do you need to, prepare some things beforehand to pack and take with? Is there restaurants that support this diet that you can eat at? Most restaurants today, you can find something on the menu that you can work with. So really just be prepared and just scout it out, like do the investigation ahead of time. So that way, when you get to that location and you're with, in a different environment, you already have the information you need to be able to make the best decisions.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Guthrie, we've had some questions about how our viewers can find medical professionals who might be able to work with them using plant-based nutrition and lifestyle medicine as their guide. Do you have recommendations for where these folks can look?
That's always been a challenge. I'd like to say a little something about the film. You know, when we started putting this film together, one of the rules we laid down was that we would not be putting down on the medical community. Most of the plant-based focused films that we had seen in the past have found some way to kind of put down on physicians. And we wanted this one to be positive because, you know, the medical community is changing. The cardiologists, yes, there are some who still can't remember, you know, the evidence. Dean Ornish's demonstration of the reversal of heart disease, right? You know, 1991 is when that was published and kind of proven. And I still have patients who are told by their cardiologists that, no, you can't change that with diet. But I mean, the evidence is there, and there are more and more who are actually telling the up-to-date truth about what you can do with diabetes and heart disease and hypertension and other diseases for that matter. So for the film, because we wanted this to be acceptable in a hospital itself, the goal was to be able to show the film to a patient in the hospital and help motivate them, be willing to change. So we came at it with that positive way. Our audience included the medical community and the patients. So we wanted to encourage all to change. As the water is rising, we might put it that way, all boats tend to rise. As the culture begins to understand, patients and physicians, that these diseases are reversible, then it becomes easier and easier for us to find each other. And now someone's asking, where do I find a doctor that will help me with this? In the film, the mention was of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And we have in the American College of Lifestyle Medicine several thousand across country who are willing and interested in doing this. And our members include nutritionists and nurses and exercise physiologists, etc., who are interested in helping move people in this direction. So the first place I would send somebody would be to the website for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and try to identify, because there is a spot in there, is find a practitioner. There's more and more around. I know that there are several in New York City who have been doing a great work there for a number of years. So ask around, and I'll tell you there's some demand for them. I know the wait in my office is sometimes 3 to 4 months before they can actually get that appointment. But it's worth the wait. And the nice thing is patients that see lifestyle medicine doctors and follow the directions don't need to see the doctor nearly as often. Corrine has done extremely well once we got her insulin adjusted and moved in the right direction. Why, I don't think I've seen her except in venues like this in several years.
Yeah.
So that you just don't need a doctor as much when you do the rules like you're supposed to.
That's right. You let her loose.
Mm-hmm.
And what an empowering thing that is, right? Wonderful. I think I want to dig just a little bit more with you, Dr. Guthrie, on what more we can do to support the medical community in moving in this direction. Obviously, as a leader in the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, you've already taken on that mantle. Tell us a little bit more about where the future of this movement for change will take us.
Interesting challenge. When I talk to my colleagues, I want to have scientific evidence, good scientific evidence for everything that I put down. I know when I wrote the book, Eat Plants, Feel Whole, I was very careful to have documentation, good scientific evidence, randomized controlled trials, and similar quality studies for everything that I claim. I know that I have patients that come to me And they say, but my cardiologist says, my endocrinologist says. And what I try to do is actually give them a copy of the study to take to their doctors. So it helps to kind of stop the argument that this can't be done. You can't reverse your disease. You can't put it into remission. So to me, it's the science is what we have to do to talk to our physicians. Now, I happen to teach in a family medicine residency here in Winter Park, Central Florida. And we ran a program with grants where we hired a nutritionist. You saw Louisa on the film. She was one who spoke well about the importance of improving your lifestyle by changing your diet. So she worked with us, and to get our doctors, we have young doctors that we're trying to train, to get them to refer to our program with a dietitian and myself with kind of shared medical appointments. We ran the program with a few people, and then we had those that were successful come and share their personal stories with the doctors. And when the young doctors and my fellow faculty heard these stories, they said, well, maybe this is a worthwhile thing to do. And once they began to experience patients getting off, lowering their insulin doses, coming off of medication, experiencing normal A1Cs without medication, in about 4 years, we reversed 23 different patients, reversed their diabetes. Now, we're going to use that word carefully. Some don't like us to use it. Remission is now the word that's more acceptable in the medical community. But, we identified that as an A1C that was no longer in the diabetes range. They were off all medications. So, that's exciting when you can actually see that happening. That's very encouraging. And it's those stories when patients see that happening that get them excited about it. Several years ago, and it was mentioned that I've had some involvement with the CHIP program, Coronary Health Improvement Project, it was in those days. One of the cardiologists that we used in a practice that I was in California was kind of resistant to these changes and had made some rather poor lifestyle choices himself, a little bit corpulent and prone to angina. And when one of his patients came through our program and went back home to her cardiologist, and he saw what was happening, he said, this is good. Maybe I should get involved with this. And as a matter of fact, he listened, made the changes in his own lifestyle, and then began to run those same programs in the hospital that he was more closely associated with. So I think what makes the difference is stories. And to me, that's what this film is about, telling stories of people who have made changes. They're real stories, facts. Scientific papers don't change behaviors nearly as well as stories do. As Corrine has pointed out, if you hear a story, if you can identify it, maybe I need to do that. And hope is rises, it becomes motivation, and the changes are made, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly. And as those stories are experienced by the patient and shared with their doctors, more and more doctors are certainly willing to make the changes and teach their patients to do the same thing.
Excellent. Yes. And the power of the story is just so real. And I'm so really grateful for a film like this that puts the story front and center. Corrine, on your side, being a nurse, I'd love to hear how this has affected who you are as a nurse, if at all, and where you see the future of nursing as well, given what we know about food and health.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just imagine instead of having to be by the bedside caring for someone who's sick and, dying or something like that, that you can be, working one-on-one with them and helping them to transform their lives before they even get to that point. It's just an amazing privilege as a nurse to be able to educate patients. That's a lot of what we do as well. People don't always think of it that way, but we're often educating them as we're, taking care of them. And that's been my whole, story, just to share my story. I think, like Dr. Guthrie said, it's just a powerful motivator. And so wherever your circle of influence is, find someone you can connect with. Maybe it's, not a patient because you're not in healthcare, but maybe it's a coworker, a neighbor, friend, or family member. Find someone that you can share this information with, because it can just be so life-changing that, it will impact the healthcare system with you not even being in healthcare, because it's just going to change the way their whole life functions, and maybe mitigate some of the disease that they are headed towards, that they don't even realize is happening, because it takes sometimes years for these things to show up. So really just be a voice for plant-based eating and just healthful lifestyle in general.
Fantastic. Thank you both for being with us this evening and for sharing your story both tonight and in the film so beautifully. Thank you, Dr. Guthrie, for your leadership in the Advent Health community and being part of making this film possible. And I want to give a shout out to Karen, I know, who's in our audience, who is one of the co-executive producers, and for her help with everything. So thank you both so much. Enjoy the rest of the year. I hope that you have many, many more conversations like this one with communities around the country and the world, because these stories are powerful and we need everybody to hear them.
Please give the listeners, access to the film. I mean, it's free on the web, so they can share it with friends and send the stories around. Let's change our medical culture.
Absolutely. We're sharing in the chat box right now the link to the video, which is available for free for anybody to watch. So please do share with friends. Excellent. Thank you both. And just to wrap it up for our listeners as we approach 8:30 on the East Coast, I want to say thank you and give you all the tools for the next step. We always love to work at Plant Powered Metro New York on putting what we learn into practice. So one of the things that we do as a community of lay people and medical professionals together is to support one another in the change process and to be here for each other when times get tough and maybe we fall off the wagon, but we get back on together. So I'm sharing in the chat box also a link to upcoming events with Plant Powered Metro New York, and I hope that you'll join us. Upcoming this Sunday, we have a culinary demonstration with Chef Carol Levy at 5 p.m. Eastern, Sunday the 13th. We're also going to be celebrating our 3rd anniversary on Tuesday, March 8th at 7 o'clock p.m. If you're inclined to join us, we will be celebrating 3 special honorees, including Dr. Colin Campbell, who was mentioned, his book, The China Study, was mentioned in the film this evening. You can join our 3rd anniversary live stream for free back here on YouTube or Facebook. And I'm putting another link in the chat box for you to be able to participate. And if you're willing to support Plant Powered Metro New York so we can do the work that we do in raising awareness all over the metro area even better. And then the final resource that I'll share with you is our recipe app. For anybody looking for great ideas, what we've done is curated recipes from our community members, put them in an easy app for you to access online. And it's a way to, I think, show the beauty of the power of what we can all do together when we pool our collective knowledge and bring it out to each other. So thank you all for joining us. And if you have any needs or questions, feel free to get in touch with us. Join us at plantpoweredmetrony.org, and you'll find lots of resources to help you on your journey. Have a great evening.